สวัสดีครับ I'm Point from Khonphob. Today I want to reflect upon the nature of the content and the videos that I produce here on this channel and on this page, Khonphob. But first of all, I want to thank you all very much for following along, for staying tuned throughout the months and the years. It really does mean a lot to me, and I'm very grateful for it. I really do appreciate it very much, and I hope that you find some value in the content or the videos that I produce. And but more importantly, if you have noticed, especially recently, the nature of the videos I do on topics of personal development, personal growth, self-actualization, or even self-realization, if you want to put it that way, they often come from two main perspectives, from psychological perspectives that are based in scientific study and research, and also from the perspective of mindfulness, awareness, or as in Thai we call sati, or in other words, from the wise teachers. And I think we can learn a lot from both perspectives. And I try my best to combine them to get the best of both worlds. And ultimately, it is my hope and my understanding that essentially they're the same thing. Essentially, they're pointed towards the same thing. And if you can get the best of the two, it helps us even more greatly on our own journeys towards personal development and self-actualization. Right? So where am I going here? First of all, the idea that I want to present in today's topic is, as you saw in the quote, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And that is a quote by Seneca, who I believe is a Roman Stoic philosopher way back then. And of course, there was no field of study of psychology back then, right? And you will find that a lot of wise teachers throughout human history, the ones who have reached the pinnacle of their own self-actualization, who we could consider enlightened beings, however you would like to define enlightened, they all keep saying the same thing. So I've always found that quite interesting to pay attention to what they're saying. How different individual human beings throughout time, in different cultures, in different socio-economic contexts, in different time periods of our history, often independently come up and say the same thing and same thing and same thing. And as science and psychology, which is pretty much a relatively new field of science, which is only a few hundred years old, the study of psychology, as we are making advancements there with a lot of advancement in brain scanning technology, for example, which helps us to understand our brain and our mind much better. You know, the science is also catching up and finding many similar conclusions. However, there is one fundamental difference between the different schools which they have not been reconciled yet today, but hopefully sometime in the future we'll be able to reconcile it. But that's for a whole nother topic, for another conversation. So before I talk about that, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. I want to first start from the perspective of psychology, which is grounded in science, scientific research, case studies, research that has been done, experiments that have been done throughout the past few hundred years. If you notice, I present a lot from what I have learned from my coaching work as well. And put simply, if you look at it from a psychological perspective, this perspective of psychology, the only reason why anybody ever experiences stress, anxiety, feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, feelings of out of control or powerlessness, right, or fear, are only in situations where that individual does not believe and does not feel that they have the control over the situation. Now, control implies two things. Control, number one, implies direct influence. So it is your ability to directly manage or control or avoid a situation, right? Or control, in a second sense, means emotional self-awareness, emotional control, emotional management skills. In other words, you feel that you are able to control and cope with and manage and tolerate the emotional difficulties that come up in potentially stressful situations. If you feel that you have such a strong belief and unshakable belief in your ability to manage manage the situation in either way, then by definition you would not create stress, you would not create anxiety, you would not create fear and feelings of hopelessness or powerlessness. Correct? Now, just like the post that I posted recently, a few days ago, we don't really run away from that situation in that sense. We don't really run away from any given situation. What we're really running away from when we feel fear or stress or anxiety is we're really running away from our own emotions that we create around the situation. Okay? Now that's important to point out because from the psychological perspective, this is about understanding our emotions and managing our emotions better. The more skillful we become as we learn to develop these skill sets, the more better we are able to manage and persevere and overcome the hurdles and challenges and difficulties of life. Because life will throw you challenges. Life is uncertain. But if you can develop a skill set knowing that you can cope and you can manage and you can overcome and you can have influence over your experience in life, then you will lead a thriving life, as I often talk about in my other coaching page. Right? That's psychology. The ability to be able to do that comes from developing genuine self-confidence, genuine self-esteem, genuine beliefs in your skill sets to be able to get through those situations. And these beliefs must be grounded in genuine evidence. For example, if I claim to be able to run a marathon a few months from now, how legitimate is that claim? The legitimacy of that claim will depend on my skill set in being able to run a long distance and also in being able to cope with the mental strain that comes up during long distance runs. But more importantly, if I make that claim that I can run a marathon 2 weeks from now, if that claim is genuine, it better be grounded in evidence that I have done my training throughout the past months and years. I'm used to running 15 kilometers every few days, 20 kilometers, 25 kilometers. So that would make that belief in my ability to run a marathon more genuine and more truthful in that sense. That's psychology. We can all learn to develop those skill sets. We can all learn to understand why we think negative thoughts, why we think in unhelpful ways, and how we can gently learn to challenge and change that. That's what I'm trying to say. That's psychology. But you see, the interesting thing is, when it comes to what the wise teachers are saying, have you ever noticed that they often talk about suffering and that even if you're masters at these things in the psychological domain, you will be able to lead a great life, no doubt about it, but you are still not free from suffering. You are still not free from suffering. Isn't that worth pondering about? So for me at least, these types of questions are what brought me to be interested in learning about how our mind works, learning about the nature of ourselves, who we truly are, or who we believe we are, or understanding the psychological reasons why we feel stressed, depressed, happy, or sad. Right? One more thing I forgot to mention is when we talk about psychology, it is possible to get to a point where a certain individual has such a high skill set and such confidence in his or her belief in that skill set that even if they were to be put in a situation where they were diagnosed with a life-threatening illness or a terminal illness, for example, even stage 4 cancer, they would still be thriving so much or still be maintaining such a positive perspective or optimistic attitude in a true sense, such that they don't even create any negative thoughts around it. Now that is an amazing thing to achieve, and I don't claim to be able to achieve that myself, certainly not today, But I look at that as a possibility, and science has shown this, by the way. There's a lot of research done on these types of cases, and there are genuinely people who have learned to accept the death or accept death, right, as part of life, and choose to continue to fight to the very last minute and feel so empowered doing so. That's very interesting, and it is certainly possible to get to that point, right, in terms of your psychology, the way you look at things, your perspectives, your attitudes, your mindset, your belief, and your skills in managing your emotions and managing the situation. That's psychology. But here's where things really start to get interesting, at least from my perspective. The wise teachers, and I borrow from Eckhart Tolle a lot again because I really love the way he explains it. Because I think Eckhart Tolle, one of the teachers that I personally really, really respect a lot, I think he does such a wonderful job putting together all the teachings of different wise teachers throughout history, putting it all together and then presenting it in an easy to understand way. So one thing that Eckhart would say often is that we suffer because we are in resistance to what is. In other words, we are in resistance to reality. Right? We are in resistance to reality. Now, what does that mean? It means that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Some part of your psyche, some part of your mind is projecting an idea or a mental model, a map of reality, and saying that there's something there in your projection of what is that you don't like, that you would want to be different. You want to look younger. You want to have a girlfriend, a boyfriend. You want to be rich. You want to be successful. You want to be healthy. And you look in the mirror and you don't have all of that, or you don't have any of that, and therefore you suffer. When in fact, reality just is in a here and now. There's no direct threat per se, right? And when I do my practice, say whether it's trying to meditate or contemplation or just self-reflection, what really blows my mind is the fact that I can be sitting here in the same room, in the same day, in the same hour, and from one moment I feel great, the next moment I suffer. And if you try to observe yourself, you'll notice that correlates with the activity in your mind, what your mind is saying, the mental narrative that your mind projects, the stories that your mind plays out, right? So think about that for a second. We're always chasing our thoughts. We're always following what our thoughts are saying, and we believe those thoughts to be true, when in fact they're just nothing but thoughts. And I think that's what it means when they say, or when, for example, Eckhart Tolle says that suffering comes from when you are identified with those unhelpful thought patterns, those negative thought patterns, that has some sense of victimhood perhaps, that has some sense of poor me, I'm so small, I'm not good enough, I still haven't made it, I'm somehow not complete or not fulfilled or not good, or the list goes on. Now, the similarity or the combination of bringing it together with psychology is that, as I often talk about from my when I present material from the coaching perspective or from psychological studies, is the science has also shown that indeed we do not experience reality. What that means is we don't experience reality for what it truly is. What we experience, and I talk about this a lot, is always a result of the way in which we look at things, the way in which we process information, interpret things. It is a result of our thoughts, beliefs, and attitudes and perspectives. Right? So, similar findings there. How you interpret what the implications of those similarities are is a whole different story. But what I want to present here is it's quite interesting, because now psychology and science and what the wise teachers are saying through their own self-realization or self-insight, they now merge, right? They're saying the same thing. Isn't that interesting, right? I'll give you another example that I really like how Eckhart puts it. Again, going back to Eckhart. And of course, many other teachers say the same thing, but I like the way Eckhart communicates it. Is, for example, the mind has a habit where it is always projecting onto some future event, some future situation, some future thing that you always need to do, always need to chase, always needs to get done. And implied in that is the resulting behavior where you're always in a rush to do things, to get to the next point, to get to the next event, to get to the next thing. And it implies resistance to what is, because what that implies is, it implies that you're always chasing the mental projections in your mind that something out there is more important. Oh, I gotta send that email to work with my colleague. Oh, I gotta do my chores. And you're always in a hurry. And therefore, you're never present. And when you're not present, you're either stuck in the future through conceptual thinking, or stuck in the past thinking about something in the past and feeling regret, for example, or feeling bad, right? And therefore, that's what it means to say that you are not in the present moment. And therefore, that's what it means to say that you are in resistance to what is. If you are not in the present moment, therefore, you are in resistance to what is, therefore, you suffer. Again, as Seneca puts it, we often suffer more in imagination than in reality. And what's interesting is the wise teachers who truly understand this, who are not self-deluded, or who have at the very least worked through and transcended as much delusion as possible, as much of their own cognitive biases as possible, as much of ideology as possible, they will all say the same thing, that these truths are for you to verify for yourself. Don't take anybody's words for it. As the Buddha said, as the Buddha would teach, from what I understand, don't take the Buddha's word for it. Prove this to yourself in your own direct understanding. But it must be grounded from insight and wisdom from within. If you lack wisdom, you get off track very easily, which is why this work can be dangerous in that sense. Right? So the point is, when I try to verify this for myself, when I try to think about what they're trying to say, what the teacher's trying to say, and try to follow on some awareness or mindfulness exercise, I very quickly run into the problems that they have already talked about, which is to be expected. And that is, the mind will very quickly not want to be present. When I try to meditate, I begin that session with, I don't want to meditate. The mind wants to be thinking about something, wants to be engaged in something all the time, wants to be thinking about something in the future, thinking about something in the past. It's never really present. And so that's quite interesting. You learn more about the nature of your own mind through that way too. And if you do this in the correct way, with a good teacher who can guide you in a right way, in a balanced way, right, then you will quite quickly develop self-understanding, right? And as I talked about in some of my previous videos, your suffering also comes from judgments based on, I like this, I don't like that, this is me, this is not mine, other versus me, mine versus other, likes and dislikes, good and bad, for example, right? Because in order for your mind to be caught off in the monkey mind, or be off track and thinking about the future or thinking about the past, its very nature is it's based on judgments, usually, right? Some form of judgment. This situation is not good, I gotta get to the next situation, I gotta do the next thing, this thing right now isn't good, right? The commute to work is taking so much time, I'm bored of traffic, I can't wait to get out of this traffic jam, right? Why won't my partner text me back? Why won't my girlfriend text me back? What's happening, right? Judgments all the time, right? projections, mental projections all the time. And you believe that to be true, and therefore you suffer. So meditation will teach us to be more humble and learn to gradually understand the nature of the mind and see things for what they are. You will be able to separate the monkey mind from what truly is, and you pull yourself back to the present moment. And that's what it means to be mindful, or to have awareness, at least from my understanding of it. And once you're able to do that more, you learn to realize that a lot of your fears, worries, anxieties, and stress are also produced from within, usually produced by your own mental projections. Again, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And that's very similar to what I talk about from the perspective of psychology, or from my coaching work, Thrive with Point. Right? So what is the takeaway here in today's video is that the more you learn about yourself, the more agency you begin to develop. Now, agency in this sense means the more control you learn to develop over your life. Think of it this way. To have true control over yourself and your experiences of life depends on genuine, deep self-insight, self-understanding. Understanding the nature of the way you think, your beliefs, your thoughts, your attitudes. At the same time, understanding the nature of your mind, how you produce your own suffering. And once you understand that in the truest sense, you are more empowered to lead life the way you want, and to lead life in a way that minimizes suffering for yourself and for the people around you. Okay, so as food for thought today, think about that, right? What the wise teachers are saying, what the science is showing, starting to come together. And try to reflect upon this by observing yourself, contemplating, doing some contemplation work, or perhaps meditation work. Again, which I would recommend with a good teacher who really knows what they are doing. And again, vipassana meditation, which is really pretty much just a technique of meditation that's meant to cultivate insight and self-understanding, seeing things clearly, knowing what your mind is doing, and bringing yourself back to the present moment. That's one way to look at it from my understanding and my experiences of it. Right? And one more example that I forgot to give, that I was meaning to give before I began filming this video, is if you don't believe me that, again, don't take my word for it, prove this for yourself. But if you don't believe me that we suffer more often in our imagination than in reality, think of the time where perhaps you were in a relationship. It doesn't even have to be a romantic relationship. It could be with friends and family, right? And you have an idea of who that person is, right? You have an idea of what your girlfriend is like, what your boyfriend is like, what your sibling is like, what your friend is like. And you appreciate that. You fall in love with your idea of who they are. And let's say all of a sudden their behavior changes. A breakup happens, a fight happens with a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a breakup happens. Or your friend or your family member does something that you don't approve of and you feel disappointed or you feel heartbroken in some way, shape, or form, right? And imagine how that could shatter your world, turn it on its head very quickly, just like that, at a snap. And you could be in the same room, sitting in the same chair, right? In the comfort and safety of your home, feeling happy one moment, then feeling completely sad and destroyed and devastated the next moment when you open up a text message and find something disturbing. Think about that. I'm sure we've all experienced this before. So doesn't that show you that in some essence, or at least there is some truth worth considering and worth pondering, that we are mostly out of touch with reality in its truest sense. Right? So I leave that as food for thought today. And contemplating on that will begin to encourage us to look inwards, right? Not look outwards and blame things, and not look outwards and continue to live through the projections of your ego mind, as Eckhart would say. Ego mind. Look inwards, understand yourself, and learn about yourself. And that's where apparently true freedom from suffering lies. And I myself have not arrived there yet. Hopefully, as I continue to grow, and I invite you to continue to join along with me. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time. สวัสดีครับ